Young Turks, Ben Mankiewicz, Cenk here, my father. I don't want this show to just be a show where we talk to our family members, but a couple days after Ted Kennedy died, obviously I think relevant to bring in my father, who was Bobby Kennedy's press secretary, and Dad during 1980. You advised Ted Kennedy during his presidential, the consideration of running, and then when he ran, correct?
Yeah, very briefly, not formally.
Yeah, no, I remember him calling, though, one night in 1980.
Oh, so. Yeah, we chatted.
And you thought it was a good idea that he run in 1980, did you not?
I did. I thought he could beat Jimmy Carter. I wasn't prepared for the Roger Mudd interview, which I think did him in.
Well, tell people what happened in that interview. It's a very famous interview and a terrible answer by Ted Kennedy.
Well, he wasn't prepared for that kind of question, I think. I don't know what kind of preparation he'd had, but Roger asked him, why do you want to be president? And he took a long time to answer and came up with a very kind of weak, insubstantial answer.
Yeah, it was a very esoteric answer, and it seemed like, it was not, nothing like, because I know what's best for this country and I want to lead the country to the greatness that America can, none of that. It was just,
right.
Yeah.
That's right. He talked about we're rich in natural resources and we should be more of a leader, and he wandered all over the map.
And he took like 10 seconds to start to answer.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so, do you have everybody has these stories, Frank, of some incredibly kind act that Teddy Kennedy did behind the scenes. How true was it that he didn't want to take credit for those things? And did you get a sense, knowing him personally, how often he did that kind of stuff?
Well, I'll tell you, I hear it more and more. I mean, there was an interview yesterday with Paul Begala, and he said his father or his uncle or maybe his son, I don't remember, developed some special kind of cancer. He never talked to Ted Kennedy about it at all. He hardly knew Kennedy. And one morning, Kennedy called him up and said, I hear your son or father, whoever it is, has this special odd kind of cancer. You should call this doctor. He's the leading expert in the country on it. And I've just talked to him, and he's expecting your call. And Begala says he called him, and sure enough, he had some proposal for his father and saved his life.
The conservatives sometimes...
a lot. I'll tell you another great story. In 1968, the funeral train that carried Robert Kennedy's body from New York to Washington, to Arlington for burial, a terrible accident along the way. We thought we had killed somebody, a very zealous supporter who had hung on one of those trestles over the train track as the train went by, and he was electrocuted. Something went wrong with the wiring, and he fell, and the train hit him, and he fell by the side of the track, and he was clearly dead, and was pronounced dead. And I remember calling the traveling press together to tell him about it, and gave him his name and his address and everything else so that they could report the story. And we had to do it on a special car so that Ethel would not know. It went to a big deal to tell him about this death, which was duly reported. And now, 40 years later, a documentarian film producer from England named John Baker called me up, and he's doing a documentary on the funeral train and on the people who watched it go by. And along the way, by God, he found out about this guy and discovered that he's still alive. He didn't die at all. And he says he was in a hospital for 2 or 3 years, off and on, recovering from burns and the fall and everything else, and ran up a couple of $100,000 in medical bills, which Ted Kennedy paid.
See, Tom Coburn,
nobody ever...
Right, he never talked about it?
I didn't even know the guy lived. And he'd never talked about it, and I'd never heard about it. And it turns out to be fairly typical.
Tom Coburn the other day had a town hall event where some woman was crying and asking for help because her husband was terribly ill.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and Tom Coburn basically said, we're not going to help you. Go ask your neighbor. And,
oh, yeah.
And ironically, it turns out, Frank, if your neighbor was Ted Kennedy, he would have helped you.
I think that's right. There's no question of it.
Yeah, and you know, the conservatives blame Ted Kennedy sometimes for being kind of a Santa Claus. On the other hand, Santa Claus is kind of a nice guy. And it's nice to have him around every once in a while. And so, you know, that leads...
yeah, but even Santa Claus only works one day a year.
Apparently, yeah, that's right. And Kennedy worked all year round.
Dad, that's not true. You think those toys make themselves?
Oh, well, I guess you're right. Well, they're in the workshop. Sure.
Right.
Now, Frank, you of course, spent a lot of time with the Kennedys. Ben and I were talking about this during the break, and it made me curious. How good of friends were the Kennedy brothers? You know,
Robert and Ted, anyway.
Especially Robert and Ted.
Dad?
How good friends were they to each other?
Yeah,
I don't think there's ever been anyone closer. Damon and Pythias, maybe. But, you know, there's not much recorded on it. But, no, I worked very closely with Robert Kennedy when the two of them were in the Senate together. And I don't think there was a day that they didn't talk or physically meet and discuss something 4 or 5 times. And that was true through life. I mean, they were very, very, very close and consulted on all kinds of things.
When you were Bobby Kennedy's press secretary, and this was a very informal, much more informal time in the Senate. I mean, if somebody came into the Senate office of Bobby Kennedy and asked to see the senator, there was a good chance they were going to see the senator.
Yeah,
certainly.
Yeah,
I mean, certainly. I don't mean somebody necessarily off the street, but certainly a journalist.
Sure.
Right?
Except for lobbyists, you
Right.
would never see a lobbyist.
Well, that's something to know about Bobby Kennedy too, which I think clearly also related to Ted. I don't know.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah. So
he would never talk to a lobbyist at all.
Bobby Kennedy would never
talk to one. One of them sneaked in one day. A lobbyist. I don't know. He was connected somehow to the Olympics in Mexico in '68, and he got in one question with Robert Kennedy before he signaled me with his eyes he wanted him out of there. And he said, I remember he said to Senator Kennedy, you know, Senator, he said, the Mexican Olympics are going to create 20 new millionaires, and I intend to be 2 of them.
That's really funny.
Right, and Bobby looked at you and thought, that's the end. That's the end of this meeting.
That's the end of this meeting. Get this guy out of here.
So then you walk up and you're like, okay, it's time to go.
That's right. Well, I said it's an important call, Senator. Senor, or whatever his name was, you're going to have to come out with me and wait for a while.
I love that important call.
But you also, when somebody would come in to meet with. When someone would come in to meet with Bobby and he wasn't in the office, you felt like you knew where he'd be.
I assumed he was with Ted, right?
That's great. Now, Frank, it sounds like it was a different time back then. I mean, today the idea of a senator not meeting with lobbyists seems so foreign and unbelievable that I literally wouldn't believe it.
I don't think there are any more of them. I think they all meet with them now.
Do you have a sense? I mean,
it's true that. They certainly detached their Senate duties from straight constituency service, including talking to lobbyists. That's pretty much of a new development, but it's total now.
Frank, you know, you've been around in politics a long time, and do you get a sense of how that changed? I mean, how it went from Bobby Kennedy not refusing to meet with any lobbyists to now senators devoting a great chunk of their time to meeting with nothing but lobbyists?
Well, you know, along with everything else, it may be due to television in large part. The campaigning now costs immensely more money because of you've got to buy the TV time. And that's all it is. That's how campaign money is spent. When you read that somebody raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, just bear in mind that all goes to either some cable outlet or a network for a television buy. But in those days, it didn't cost as much. There were only 2 news cycles, the evening news and the morning newspapers. And life has become, for senators, for congressmen, and candidates, much more competitive, controversial, and ultimately nearly violent. And you need a lot of money for that. You spend time talking to people who can raise money, and most of them are lobbyists of one kind or another. They have an axe to grind.
We're talking to Frank Mankiewicz, former press secretary to Bobby Kennedy, and a friend and advisor to Ted Kennedy for a time as well. You know, Dad, watching that wonderful HBO special, Teddy in his own words, some of the most interesting parts of that are the Nixon tapes talking about Ted Kennedy. And in 1972, even, seemed that the Nixon's big fear, it sounded like, was Ted Kennedy.
Well, I think he thought that the last minute Ted was going to enter that race. A lot of people did, yeah.
So Nixon says in those tapes, which you're aware of, after Arthur Bremer shoots George Wallace in Maryland, not an advisor to Nixon saying this, Nixon himself suggests to Haldeman, he says, hey, put it out there.
No, it was to Colson.
No, it's to, well, then they're two different recordings, because the one that's in the show is unquestionably Haldeman.
Oh, all right.
And he says, which makes it worse, by the way.
Sure.
And he says to Haldeman, hey, put it out there that we have it on incontrovertible evidence. Some words to that effect. Just put it out there. I have a transcript right here. Now, just put that out. Just say you have it on unmistakable evidence, he says. Just say he was a supporter of Kennedy. Put it out there on unmistakable evidence. And then he says, and don't mess it up. Let's play the game right, he says. Let's get it right this time. Screw the record. And then he adds, screw the record. Put that out. And can we do that? And, of course, Haldeman, being Haldeman, says, yeah, sure, we can do that. No problem, sir. Whatever you say, boss.
Did you have a sense back then of how dirty Nixon was?
No, but I have heard on tape Nixon urging Colson, in addition to that conversation, to send somebody out to Milwaukee right away, because Nixon knew early on where the assassin's home was in Milwaukee. To send somebody, get somebody out there ahead of the FBI to his apartment and plant McGovern literature.
So
that's the President of the United States talking.
So we have two situations here. First of all, I want to talk about the fear of Ted Kennedy there, even when his opponent was looking. I mean, of course, the Democratic nomination wasn't decided at that point, but
they were in the middle of we were in the middle of the primaries.
Right, it was in March, I think.
Well, no, it was in May. Wallace was shot on the day of the Maryland primary.
And that was in May?
Yeah, I know that because it was on my birthday.
All right. Well, okay, there you go. I'm going to defer to you on that. Seeing as how you were George McGovern's campaign manager. So Nixon first or second, at one of these points, maybe when he realizes that we got to find out what came first, he tells Chuck Colson to go get there ahead of the FBI and plant evidence in Arthur Bremer's Wisconsin apartment that put McGovern literature there to make this guy seem like a McGovern supporter.
Yeah, and then Colson later is on tape telling him it's too late, the FBI's already there.
Oh, that's a shame.
So I would imagine the conversation with Haldeman comes after the one with Colson.
All right, so then he says, just put it on unmistakable evidence. He doesn't evidence they don't have. He's just make it up. So he then moves and says, make it seem like it was Kennedy.
Yep.
Well, Jesus, come on.
Yeah, right.
So did you guys, I'm going to go back to this for a second, did you guys know what you were up against? I mean...
Not that much, no.
So you thought you were having a campaign on the level, and you had no idea the president was willing to do things that seemed unconscionable at the time to bury you guys?
Well, and that were criminal. You know, I mean, people go to jail for things like that.
Well, they don't anymore, but but they did before Nixon and before Ford pardoned him. So yeah, then it's kind of a tough.
Plaxico Burress gets 2 years though.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. No, it's a tough thing to run a campaign against and to not because you guys are playing on the level and they're looking to butcher you guys in 18 different ways.
Criminally, yeah, that's right.
And then to go back to Ben's point, it's amazing how scared they were of Ted Kennedy.
Yeah, well, Ted Kennedy looked in '72 as though he could beat Nixon. I mean, the polls showed him running ahead. the only Democrat. They showed most of the other Democrats running behind. McGovern was then seen as running maybe 5 or 6 points behind, but not landslide proportions as eventually developed.
So I don't know what happened there. Why did Kennedy not run?
I imagine he thought that there would still be a overlay from Chappaquiddick, which had only been 3 years earlier.
Right. So.
And I think from watching again, if you watch when you guys have a chance to see that HBO special in his own words, Teddy in his own words, which I'm sure will run again soon. The fear that he had that somebody would kill him was incredibly real. I mean, that's not little pop psych analysis. I mean, he is.
The fear that who had? Nixon?
That Teddy had, that the family had, that it was just too soon to
yeah, that may be in the works too. I think that's right.
And of course that obviously that makes it makes all the sense in the world. Although you're right. I mean, only 3 years removed from Chappaquiddick is still. It was an issue in 1980. It certainly would have been an issue in 1972.
That's right.
Frank, let me ask you a question out of left field here. Are you convinced that the people they say killed the Kennedys actually killed the Kennedys?
I'm pretty well convinced in the case of Robert Kennedy. I'm, of course, totally unconvinced in the case of John Kennedy, the president.
Right. You were there that day, of course, for RFK, and so you're a good source on that, unfortunately. But it's interesting. You're unconvinced on John F. Kennedy. I don't want to get into theories as to who it might be, but you think that that lone bullet theory is it nonsense?
Yeah. I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald fired the bullets. But the question, of course, is who was he and who was he working for and who was running him? And who had him shot 2 days later so that he couldn't talk?
I really find that the hardest part to get beyond.
Yeah, and the fact that the guy who shot him was a clear mobster. So,
right.
And so that's.
Well, I have no suspects for the Kennedy case, but I do believe it lies somewhere in the middle of the mafia, Cuban exiles, and maybe renegade CIA people, rogue CIA agents or ex-agents.
We'll wrap this up, Dad, and get back to real quick to Teddy. What is it's a question that a lot of people are asking. Cenk asked me in the last hour. Let me put it to you this way: is Ted Kennedy the most influential of the Kennedy brothers?
I think he's proved to be. Yeah, I think he has. I think in the last 10, 15, 20 years in the Senate, he had more influence than either of them, even the president, because the president had majorities in both houses, but very narrow ones.
That's interesting, and so it's fair to put Teddy Kennedy up there as one of the all-time great senators in American history at this point.
Oh, I don't think there's any question of it. I've said, and I think I don't know that I'd get in the argument, that he was certainly the greatest president, the greatest senator we had in the 20th century. And here it's only 9 years into it, but I think he might be a contender for best president of the 21st.
Senator, right?
All right. Well,
Senator, right?
Frank Mankiewicz happens to be my father, but was Bobby Kennedy's press secretary in 1968. Ran George McGovern's campaign with Gary Hart in 1972. And vice president at Hill and Knowlton now. All right, Dad, thank you very much.
Not at all. Happy to do it.
All right, fly safely to Chicago today.
Thanks, Frank. All right, we will be right back.